World War II was over, but peace did not last long. Two superpowers emerged from the ruins, each claiming to represent the future of humanity. On one side, the Soviet Union. On the other, the Western world led by the United States. This was not a war of bullets and bombs, it was a war of ideology, influence, and fear. In the early 1950s, despite the devastation caused by the war, the Soviet government restored the national economy through the fourth and fifth five-year plans. Thanks to planned economy and technological advancements, industrial development and agricultural production in the 1950s reached a better level than before the war. While the Soviet Union was beginning to heal the wounds of the war, Joseph Stalin suddenly suffered a heart attack at the age of 74 and died on March 5, 1953. Although Stalin had transformed the Soviet Union into an industrial and military superpower, the harsh and oppressive policies he implemented cost millions of Soviet lives. During his dictatorship, nearly 20 million people, half of whom were from the Turkic republics, died due to labor camps, forced lands and farms, famine, and extrajudicial executions. With Stalin's sudden death, a power struggle began in the country. On September 7, 1953, Nikita Khrushchev was appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In his speech at the Congress, Khrushchev criticized Stalin's mistakes and launched an anti-Stalinist campaign. Khrushchev decided to pursue reconciliation with Western states in foreign policy, but in 1955, the Warsaw Pact was established against NATO, led by the USA. During Khrushchev's era, the Soviet Union achieved great successes in economy, science, and technology, becoming one of the two superpowers in the world. In 1957, the first satellite named Sputnik was launched into space, and in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to travel into space. With its achievements in space technology, the Soviet Union proved it was ahead of America. Alongside these achievements, communism began spreading rapidly abroad. In 1959, under the leadership of Fidel Castro, socialism was declared in Cuba, showing that the ideology had reached America's doorstep. America increased tension against the Soviet Union by deploying nuclear missile ramps to Turkey. In response, the Soviet Union sent nuclear missile ramps to Cuba. When America became aware of this situation, Cuba was blockaded from the sea, and it was announced that Soviet ships would not be allowed to pass to Cuba. As both America and the Soviet Union came close to a hot war, calls for common sense from both sides helped the crisis to be resolved in a short time. After this period, despite advances in science, technology, and the economy, the Soviet Union began to experience some political problems. Appointments to critical roles without the approval of the party's executive committee increasingly drew attention. Furthermore, despite the increase in agricultural production, imports of certain agricultural products, especially wheat, increased to meet the needs of the rapidly growing population. All these problems led to the formation of an internal opposition within the party. Al Suslov, who had ideological influence in the party, suggested that Khrushchev's criticisms of Vestal, accusing him of abusing his powers, be turned into a personal enmity and removed. Based on this suggestion, the party leadership removed Khrushchev from the General Secretary position of the Soviet Union in October 1964. On October 14, 1964, Leonid Brezhnev was appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Economic reforms carried out during his period produced positive results, and the Soviet Union became one of the world's two superpowers economically once again. As the urban population grew, the level of culture increased, and literacy reached 100%. According to World Bank data, in 1970, the Soviet Union's education expenditure was 77% of the country's budget. Considering that today this rate is around 5-6 in G7 countries, we can understand how much importance the Soviet Union attached to education. On the other hand, the Soviet Union supported requests for assistance by some African countries, taking inspiration from their development. In particular, the independence movement against French colonialism in Vietnam led to America's invasion of the country. The Viet Cong in the north were materially supported by the Soviet Union and other socialist countries. In 1975, North Vietnam achieved absolute victory, stopping America's coup and increasing the Soviet Union's international prestige. Nevertheless, thanks to Lenin's insistence on continuing peace policies, a disarmament agreement was signed with the United States. However, this agreement led to a deterioration in relations with Cuba. Cuban leader Castro's request for new weapons from the Soviet Union to counter American threats was refused by Brezhnev due to financial reasons. After this event, relations between the Soviet Union and Cuba did not go beyond commercial exchanges. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union had reached the peak of its power. The Soviets, who initiated the space age and competed with America in the space race, sent the first spacecraft to Venus that transmitted data back to Earth. Between 1971 and 1972, industrial production increased by 43%, with special emphasis on energy and fuel production. During this period, the Soviets became the world's largest producers and exporters in coal, iron, steel, oil, and cement. Additionally, with this economic policy, the average monthly wages of workers and civil servants increased by more than 150, while expenses for free health care, free municipal services, scholarships, nurseries, and kindergartens were covered by the state, and the public's real income increased by 40%. In 1978, socialists came to power in Afghanistan, establishing the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. However, in 1979, the Taliban and similar groups, armed by America, started a civil war in the country. The socialist government threatened in power, requested help from the Soviet Union, and the Red Army entered Afghanistan. This intervention in Afghanistan, while causing opposition movements due to financial burden, generally maintained a period of stability in the country. The elderly leader Brezhnev died on November 10, 1982. This led to a period of frequent leadership changes in the Soviet Union. Andropov was appointed to the vacant party seat. However, Andropov died in February 1984, and Konstantin Chernenko replaced him. Chernenko served only 1 year and died in March 1985. Subsequently, Mikhail Gorbachev was brought to power as a young leader of the Soviet Union. After coming to power, Gorbachev took steps to implement many changes in the Soviet Union. However, these steps laid the groundwork for events that would lead to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The new secretary first carried out a revision in the party leadership, purging most members from previous periods. At the party meeting held in February 1986, the principle of political transparency was adopted. However, this transparency policy caused nationalist feelings to rise in non-Russian republics. In 1990, the Soviet Union allowed East Germany to unite with West Germany. In 1990, in the Socialist People's Republics of Eastern Europe, the socialist governments fell one by one as a result of anti-communist propaganda initiated by Western countries. This event began to economically shake the Soviet Union, which had trade agreements with socialist countries. In the same year, with the transition to a free market economy in the Soviet Union, price liberalization caused the prices of basic food products to rise rapidly, preventing people from even meeting their basic needs. As a result of these misguided policies, the ensuing economic collapse further fueled nationalist demands. The first rebellion began in March 1990 when the Baltic country Lithuania declared independence, but it was prevented by the intervention of the Red Army. In 1990, a reform abolished the General Secretary position, which held executive authority, and a presidential system was adopted. The same reform also introduced a multi-party system. Mikhail Gorbachev was elected as the head of state of the Soviet Union, while regime opponent Boris Yeltsin was elected as the head of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. On August 19, 1991, the army, led by the KGB, attempted a military coup against the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. The military coup was quickly suppressed, and this event increased Boris Yeltsin's popularity. With the deepening political crisis, in September 1991, 8 socialist states forming the Soviet Union seceded one by one. Considering it impossible to maintain political unity, Mikhail Gorbachev announced his resignation on December 25, 1991. On the same day, at midnight, the red flag was lowered at the Kremlin and replaced with the Russian flag, officially ending the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics on December 25, 1991. See you in the next video. For now, goodbye.